Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Michel Camdesou and Bernard Snoy for inviting me to this very important uh, conference on the Bretton Woods, 80 years after Bretton Woods, relaunching multilateralism through regional monetary unions. Due to the shortness of time, I will stick very quickly to the key issues at hand. First, I think I want to pay tribute to Eve Anun and Peter Ditters on their prescient 2017 comment on why the global financial system remains fragile, the difficulties of recovery, climate change, digitalization, globalization, geopolitical turbulences, and why people are angry. Now, the five questions that Bernard has asked me to answer was, under what conditions could economic and monetary unions be successful? And secondly, question 2 and 3 is the monetary cooperation in Asia and the Chiang Mai Initiative. And then 4, which most people are interested in, whether China is working to build its own monetary zone. And then finally, some comments on de-dollarization and its implications for the international monetary system. Now, first of all, we need to understand that the geopolitics of money is that it's really empire-driven. Empires, the hegemon in the empire have exorbitant privilege of reserve currency creation, which, as the Robert Triffin identified, is that it creates increasing debt. And the stronger state can lead the monetary union, provided it underwrites its public goods. Now, since when Bretton Woods was formed in 1945-47, America was very generous in providing global public goods through financing, the Marshall Plan, running current account deficits so that Europe, Japan, and the rest of the world can recover. But, it basically ran what I call the Wall Street hedge fund models borrowed from the British, in which it can borrow through issuing long-term US treasuries at somewhere between 0 to 4% per annum, and then use the proceeds to re-lend or invest back in emerging markets and the rest of the world at a higher ROE, the hedge fund leverage model. Unfortunately, the system, which allows the United States to have an exorbitant currency privilege, leads to a greater and greater debt for the system. And the current G7, led model is that global debt has reached 238% of global GDP. G7 countries' average debt is 120% of GDP. And 39 out of 69 low-income countries are in or near debt distress. And of course, the US Congressional Budget Office, based on current US fiscal and trade deficits, or particularly fiscal deficits, which is already as high as the peak in World War II, is going to probably 150% of GDP by 2048, if not earlier. Now, let me address the key question of successful monetary unions in general. In a very tight or full monetary union, all members adopt a single monetary policy, a common currency, single external exchange rate, as well as absence of exchange controls. Now, the ECB, or rather the Euro system, which you all know better than me, requires also a unified capital market, integrated fiscal policies, and integration of different political views which makes it currently a work in progress. What the IMF calls pseudo monetary unions, like the Gulf Cooperation Council, is members agreeing to maintain fixed exchange rates amongst members without explicit integration of economic policy and separate foreign exchange reserves, different central banks, and monetary policies. But all monetary unions ultimately depend on one super body or lead member to be the lender of last resort or underwriter of losses within the union. And that makes the burden on that hegemon very, very heavy. Now, let me very quickly, answer the question on monetary integration in Asia. Well, Asia basically operates on variable geometry, trade integration with no monetary union. Before the Asian financial crisis in 1997-98, Asian currencies were roughly linked with each other fairly tightly. And after the Asian financial crisis, currencies were floated against the dollar, reserve increased, and bank supervision tightened. Now, the Chiang Mai initiative was essentially a central bank swap arrangements whereby the larger central banks like Bank of Japan and People's Bank of China would be able to swap with other members in the event of need. But remember, the Chiang Mai initiative has never been operationalized because one of the conditions is that members who draw upon this facility would be subject to IMF conditionality. And the only surveillance issue that was agreed upon was AMRO, which is the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office, which is now operational. In my view, monetary integration in Asia suffers from the lack of development of stock markets and long-term pension funds and institutional funds, which are able to deleverage the growing debt burden, which arose after the Asian, because after the Asian crisis, there was a move to push more long-term bond markets and local bonds, local currency bonds, forgetting that even local currency bonds can be subject to speculative attacks. Now, let me go into this very interesting question about RMB internationalization. My view is that actually when Zhou Xiaochuan, the People's Bank governor, made the statement in 2009, there was no intention for RMB to have its own monetary zone. It was very clear that the desirable goal of reforming the international monetary system is to create an international reserve currency that is disconnected from individual nations and is able to remain stable and remove the deficiencies caused by using credit-based national currencies. So the reform should be grand vision and specific deliverables and a gradual process that yields win-win results. And in 2022, in the latest 20th Party Congress, they just simply said we will promote internationalization of renminbi, involve in the global industrial division of labor and cooperation, and preserve the diversity and stability of the international economic landscape and economic and trade relations. So why is the US dollar so difficult to dislodge? And the answer is it took the US 70 years, according to Barry Eichengreen, to replace the pound sterling. The US economy was already larger in GDP than the British Empire in 1870, and the US dollar did not replace sterling until it developed its internal interbank market, foreign exchange market, stock market, and created the Federal Reserve System, so that and its stock markets. So it was a long time before there was sufficient power to maintain its role as the reserve currency status. Now, even the People's Bank of China, which publishes an annual cross-border RMB index, it showed that the United States is leading with 58.3%, Euro at 2%, and RMB only at less than 3.2%. And the RMB's share of SDR and global FX reserves are still small. So, given the fact that the Chinese economy is less than roughly 2/3 of the GDP of the United States, even though it is the largest trading nation, payments alone does not mean that the renminbi will replace the US dollar anytime soon. Now, the latest paper by Goldman Sachs on de-dollarization showed that the talk about de-dollarization accelerated after the G7 sanctions on Russia in 2022. But in terms of the percentage of US shares of US dollar assets as a share of global portfolio investment, that has tended to increase rather than decrease. Now, the reason for people talk about de-dollarization is really due to sanctions. And of course, 29% of global trade is under some form of sanctions, and 40% of the energy producers are under sanctions. And the US has imposed 2/3 of such sanctions on more than 20 countries. And as a result, supply chains are being decoupled, and people who do not want to be subject to sanctions or freezing or confiscation of their dollar or euro or American ally assets, therefore are thinking about payment systems that do not use the dollar. Now, what are the possibilities of this? Well, the CBDC, the central bank, the digital currency pilots by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Bank of Thailand, Central Bank of United Arab Emirates, and People's Bank of China, has gone past the pilot stage. And in my view, the next stage of development will be netting systems rather than using real-time gross settlement systems. And if they are settled through using CBDC or stable coins, without touching the dollar or euro or any of the G7 currencies, the particularly members of that payments mechanism rather than the monetary union may be able to escape sanctions. So let me conclude. What are the alternatives to the dollar? Well, in theory and ideally, as the Robert Triffin International recommends, it should be the SDR or a non-national currency. Now, gold has always been thought of as an alternative, but the gold reserves still remain relatively small in size. But gold prices have reached $2,400 per ounce recently, and for many investors, it's attractive because it has no counterparty risks. If you hold gold, provided it does not get stolen or seized, the assets cannot, be seized if it's physically with you. Now, in my personal view, cyber currencies may not survive a nuclear war or a severe disruption of the internet, because in a conventional warfare, as some people have realized, you can cut all the fiber optic cables, satellite disruptions, or energy failures through complete disruptions of supplies of energy or destruction of the power sources. So, Bitcoin, how would you be able to assess Bitcoin if something like that happens? So my bottom line conclusion is that for the foreseeable future, given the primacy of the United States in military, technology, finance terms, the US dollar status is for the US to lose, not easily for others to gain. I hope that means that the international monetary system cannot be reformed without the implicit or explicit consent of the United States. And the current Cold War or geopolitical tensions it is probably within the next 5 years or so unlikely to get a major agreement amongst the major shareholders of the Bretton Woods institutions to do substantive international monetary system reforms. However, there is no reason why we should not have very active debate and discussion at the academic level on why the reforms should be made. On that note, thank you very much. And if there are any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email that I have put. Thank you so very much for your attention.